Hello and welcome back to this damnful idealistic crusade. This is a reaction video to the recent updates and artwork reveal for the upcoming Sean Connery collection of his 6 Eon James Bond films being released on 4K UHD by the Warner Studio division. This is in connection with MGM and Amazon, as Warner handles MGM physical media releases at this point. Up to now, we've had little to no information, and we have just finally been told what the actual contents will be in terms of the films, the supplemental features, and we knew that there would be two options: a standard box set at around $100, and then for around $140 to $150, there would be a limited steelbook collection set. Those artworks have now been revealed as well. So while I typically don't do reaction videos in terms of physical media updates, I've been waiting for any sort of information on the Bond films because we simply don't know what they're going to use or who's doing the mastering work, or are these entirely new workflows, or are they going to likely use the pre-existing 4K masters, or how is all of this going to work out? So with this new information out there, I felt I needed to put something together. As, to put it mildly, I have a lot of thoughts. And I'm waiting with bated breath for the UHDs to actually come out in June so I can get my hands on them and dive into them. And I'm hoping they are not fraught with issues, but I'm expecting not very much. They should at least be visual improvements over the problematic Blu-rays, but that's probably about it. And unfortunately, a number of my suspicions about what the eventual outcome would be do seem to be sort of coming to pass with the information we now have. So June 10th, we'll see the release of the 6 Connery films of the official Eon series. So Dr. No, From Russia with Love, Goldfinger, Thunderball, You Only Live Twice, Diamonds Are Forever. No sign of Never Say Never Again, but that is not an Eon production, and that will be done separately if MGM, Warner, and Amazon even decide to acknowledge the 2 unofficial films, as since MGM acquired both Casino Royale 67 and Never Say Never Again, they were put on essentially an unofficial moratorium as Eon tries to pretend those films don't exist, and that's why they've been out of print for years, and both films are in dire need of new scans and new masters. So fans had hoped a Connery collection would actually include Never Say Never Again, but it not being included in an Eon official series box set does actually make sense. One hopes that it could see a new scan and UHD release in the future, but further UHD releases of any of the other Bond films, even the official Eon series films, is unknown, as all we have is this upcoming release of just the 6 Connery films and no sign of any other release plans. So with Amazon being involved, I don't know what it's going to mean for the future, or if these UHDs themselves will remain in print all that long. So I would encourage all Bond fans to pick them up sooner rather than later, and we'll just have to see what the rollout of the rest of the series might entail. Probably we will see other actor-centered sets, with the Roger Moore era the next likely set to tackle, but there's no telling if or when that will even be a thing. Since this is Warner handling things, I assumed having a steelbook collection and then a standalone basic collection will be done in similar ways to some of their other releases that did the same thing, specifically the Superman collection and then the limited steelbook set that was more expensive. They do seem to have stuck to that sort of paradigm because we now have the images and what these sets are going to look like. The Steelbook collection is in a special, what's termed a library case, and is priced at $139 US. This, like the Superman set, is a limited, more premium package containing the same disc. Here we have something that unfortunately looks like would have been perfect for the luxury branding of the 007 store, and has steelbooks of each of the films that merely contain some promotional images of Sean Connery's James Bond. Most fans were hoping and expecting to see some usage of original poster art like we've seen done on a handful of steelbooks on and off over the past couple years, and what we saw on the Warner Superman UHD steelbook set, that the steelbooks inside did contain some usage of original poster art as opposed to what was on the standard releases. Here we didn't get that. Here we get, frankly, an overpriced steelbook collection that is merely using seemingly some randomly chosen promotional and production stills with a generic sort of title usage. They're okay, I suppose, but they're very uninspired. And for this being a premium collection, this just doesn't really have a lot of spirit or attention grabbing factors to them. And the set itself is merely about the steelbooks and the case. We have the 6 individual discs that are in the standard collection, and nothing else in terms of exclusive materials. There's no book, there's no art cards, there's no poster reproduction, but you do get a numbered certificate of authenticity, which is pictured here, the little certificate there. So you get a little piece of paper for your $140. So unfortunately, the deluxe box set is merely just about the steelbooks and box packaging, and the artwork chosen is rather uninspired, but at least is serviceable. So that's what you get for your extra $40 plus tax. Some okay, I guess, steelbooks and a piece of paper. Yay. However, I would say my issues with the artwork chosen and overall design of the Steelbook set is really nothing compared to the artwork of the standard release version, which, if we are going by the image provided, looks as if they're going with simply using a UHD case itself and not having any sort of box. This will probably have a slipcover of some type, as they're charging $100 US for the list price for just 6 UHDs in a case. But the placeholder artwork was merely using the last Sean Connery actor-specific box set art that MGM had on Blu-ray, which was serviceable. Is not the most inspired choice, but at least it worked. And if they were going to reuse that, I could understand them doing it. It was obviously not the greatest art in the world, but it was serviceable enough. Well, what they've done with this is essentially take the Japanese posters and cut them into little sections that look like they've been ripped apart. And as you see on this mock-up for what the cover is going to be of a $100 box set, that's merely just a case with 6 discs in it, we've got random torn sections of 2 Japanese posters kind of all mixed around. And then the generic sort of teal aqua colored placeholder title logo as the Connery 6 film collection that they had put together, just shoved in the middle. I really don't know why somebody thought this was a good idea. I don't mind a classic poster collage, as we've seen on countless Bond products and Bond video releases even from time to time, but at least you would think there would be some representation of all 6 films, and if they were going to just make a collage of different posters and images and memorabilia, that they would, if they were taking photos, they would stage stuff properly, or if they were just mixing images in Photoshop as a mock-up, that again they would align things and get something from all 6 films and not just take posters and cut them into pieces and mix them all around and put a big blank spot in the middle with the generic title slapped on it. This is just one of the oddest cover designs I've seen on a modern release, because it obviously took a little bit of effort, but it also took very little effort at the same time, because it's primarily just 2 posters being cut into little pieces and mixed up a little bit, and then given the sort of torn effect, then shove the placeholder title in the middle of it. So while I'm glad this is using some sort of vintage imagery, I actually think it's worse than the placeholder art of carrying over the last MGM Connery Blu-ray collection. This is just one of those examples where it's I'm glad they did something, but I'm also, it's kind of insulting in a way, because there were so many things you could do with this. There are so many books that have done James Bond collages in terms of reference books and unofficial books, and even fan-published books that have done a great job just doing James Bond memorabilia collages or using posters from the films. And this doesn't even approach the level that self-published books have done with their covers, doing a James Bond image collage. This is, again, I think this is kind of insultingly bad in a way. Yes, it uses some original imagery, but there's no representation of all 6 films. It's completely random. It took somebody, it seems, a few minutes to throw this together, and it is what it is. And on top of that, we're going to have to pay $100 list price for a 6-film collection with this rather uninspired art. And it looks like we're not even going to get any sort of box set packaging, that it's just going to be in a standard case with perhaps a slipcover also featuring this very uninspired artwork. And what makes me further sort of hot and bothered about this, not that I really typically get into scrutinizing artwork, but this one just really got to me because I find it absolutely infuriating and baffling at the same time. This is actually a pretty easy assignment if you just wanted to do something basic. All you had to do was, as MGM has done in the past, get a classic promotional still of Connery, and you could even do like the Laserdisc collections and just have a generic background with some color and list the titles. I mean, that's really all you had to do. It would be rather generic and simple, as these Connery collections have typically been, but at least that would have been appropriate. This they've come up with is not that. And again, not all the films are represented. And the thought of what boutique labels or fans themselves would do, and what fans probably will do in making their own artwork, is just going to make this terrible piece of artwork for a video release be just all the more disposable. So, one can merely imagine taking one of the classic 1960s and 70s James Bond reissue posters, or double bill posters especially, that United Artists would cook up. They made some amazing ones for the Connery films. All you'd have to do is take one of those iconic posters and just put images from all 6 of the films and specifically say it's, all 6 Connery films. Do something like that, or merely use one of those classic double and triple bill posters and play around with it. That would have made this stand out and grab people's attention, especially, if it's online or sitting on a store shelf, and pay tribute to the amazing original advertising campaigns of the films. But, that would take somebody who actually knows James Bond, or took the time to actually dig around and just sampled any of the amazing artwork that exists from the original posters and ad campaigns for these 6 films. But this is the Warner department. They don't do that. So, yeah, this is just frankly horrible, and this alone made me want to say something, because I've been waiting on the edge of my seat to get these UHDs and dive into the transfers and such. The rear cover for each of these is pretty standardized. It's using the Connery gun pose with the air pistol that the Laserdisc box sets use, so they clearly could have just used this and then used that as the basis of their cover. We have the listing of the films on the standard set, and then on the Steelbook set, they just have a picture of the Steelbook set in its full display version. We now finally have the technical information we've been waiting for. So each film is on a UHD. Each film apparently will get Dolby Vision in terms of its HDR, which is a real signifier I've been waiting to find out about, as Dolby Vision is listed on the packaging. So this means that if these are the pre-existing 4K masters, or somehow they're new masters we didn't know about, they either have had Dolby Vision HDR added to the previous SDR 4K masters, or Dolby Vision was done as a part of new work that was done to produce these 4K masters. So that answers the question and my fear that these might be just HDR10 only, and Warner is typically very bad at just doing HDR10, and they don't like doing Dolby Vision. This indicates that, at least to me, this will probably be something that Warner is merely handling the disc side of, like they did for the Terminator and other films that they handle for MGM. They are merely releasing and making the discs of MGM prepared master material, as Warner typically never will use Dolby Vision. They strictly go with HDR10 only when it's a master they make. The other important signifier is down here on the bottom. Under the audio, we have listed DTS HDMA lossless English 2.0 mono for the 6 films. This means that we will thankfully have the original proper mono tracks for all 6 films, as with one exception we found on the Blu-rays. So what I'm thinking is that this will merely be the lossy tracks that were only on the North American Blu-rays, ported over to the UHDs, now upgraded to a lossless codec. Unfortunately, the mono tracks on all modern releases are typically extraordinarily processed and not very good sounding, with some sounding quite terrible due to the heavy-handed usage of noise reduction and other audio processing techniques. So the audio has needed a complete restoration overhaul for all of the films for decades. It's possible they did work on the audio some, but we don't really know anything because they're not telling us about any of the restoration work or where any of these came from in terms of sources or the age of the masters. So I can only assume this will likely be either what was on the North American Blu-rays now upgraded to lossless quality, or possibly they've had further processing applied, as Warner and other studios are notorious for doing that. So thankfully, the original audio tracks are going to be here for the 6 films, again, with one possible exception. So that's something we've needed to know, and thankfully, this does seem to be on the UHD releases overall, and so the foreign territory UHDs will hopefully also have the original audio, as the Blu-rays dropped the original audio tracks to accommodate all of the additional foreign dub tracks the Region B and other releases had. Now, the one exception I mentioned is, of course, Thunderball, which, as I documented in the video I made, has 2 completely different, unique original mono mixes that were used on the 1965 theatrical release. Both mono mixes have never been properly restored and presented on a release together, giving the viewer the option of which mono mix they want to view the film with. Each mix has differences in dialogue, music, and effects, and thus they both need to be properly restored and presented as 2 separate tracks. On the Blu-ray release of Thunderball, the 5.1 remix had reverted to a version of the 1995 MGM home video stereo remix of the film. The track labeled mono on that Blu-ray was merely a fold down of that new 5.1 transfer of the MGM stereo remix. So on the Blu-ray, the mono track was really not a mono track at all, and the Mix A mono that had been on all video releases pre-1995 was still missing. So the mono track on this UHD of Thunderball could be most anything. It could be the Mix A mono that hasn't been on a video release in its entirety since before 1995. It could be the Mix B mono, but most likely it's going to be another form of a mono version of the MGM stereo remix, or possibly even that same mono fold down that was on the Blu-ray release. So that's the one question I have in terms of original audio, is Thunderball could be a variety of different things. And the reason why I say it could be a variety of different things especially is that these will no longer just have the atrocious 5.1 Mikasa Studios remixes that were done for the Lowry Ultimate Edition DVDs and have cursed the films ever since. We now have listed Dolby Atmos with True HD Core multi-channel tracks for the films, which means they have been remixed yet again and are now in the full modern world of Dolby Atmos with objectified bass sound. This means that either the terrible Mikasa 5.1 remixes have themselves been remixed into Atmos, which will only make the problems those remixes have even worse and more in your face, or they have done new multi-channel Atmos remixes from scratch of films that were mono films, and films where, at least for the first 3, there are no original surviving stems, and all you have are the mono mixes and higher gen sources, but not the actual original dialogue, music, and effects stems. So you've got very limited materials, and all you'll be able to do is really move the mono mix around, but now in Atmos with overhead channels instead of just 5.1. And Warner has been notorious for making really terrible Dolby Atmos remixes of catalog titles on their UHDs that were completely unnecessary and will add new effects and take already bad remixes and make them even worse by just spreading the sound around more and now having overhead channels. So I had assumed these would probably just carry those Mikasa 5.1 remixes, but now having it confirmed that these have brand new Dolby Atmos remixes makes me really leery, because that's what I wished wouldn't happen. In fact, I don't think any of the films for the six Connery films need to have anything other than full restorations of their original mono mixes, with the exception of some of the later films having perhaps some magnetic stereo runs or potential 70mm blowups with 6-track magnetic stereo. These films were not designed or mixed or ever released in anything but mono, and particularly for the first three films, since they had lower budgets, they certainly were not intended for anything else other than mono, and their mono mixes for the time are actually groundbreaking in terms of sound mixing and levels and design. And yes, it's great. We will apparently have the original mixes for at least 5 of the 6 films. Again, I think Thunderball is very much in question, and I'd be really surprised if it did have its original mono mix on here, at least one of the 2. I'm just really leery to find out what these Dolby Atmos remixes are going to do to the sound design of the original Bond films for the 6 Connery films, because already I thought the 5.1 remixes, in terms of the Mikasa Studios ones, were extraordinarily destructive and should have never been released in the first place. So that's my feelings on the little bit of information we've gotten about the audio. So I'm still really leery. I'm still just waiting until I can get my hands on these, but at least we do finally know that some form of original audio for the mono mixes will be present for at least 5 of the 6 Connery Eon films. Again, it's still unknown if Thunderball will actually have its true original mono mix, and by that I mean at least one of them. But I would be surprised if it didn't just have another mono fold down of a stereo remix. But now knowing that the multi-channel versions have been redone with Dolby Atmos means that we could see a whole new world of potential sound revisionism, and it'll either be slightly more palatable or perhaps even worse than the already terrible Mikasa Studios 5.1 remixes done for the Lowry Digital masters on the Ultimate Edition DVDs, which came out back in 2006. And now we come to the other tidbits about this release that are a bit disconcerting, and other bits of information we now have. It seems that all of the pre-existing legacy supplements will be making it onto these UHDs, and thus actually be on the UHD discs themselves and not a Blu-ray disc, as no Blu-rays are included. So this means everything from the Blu-rays, which primarily were extras derived from the Ultimate Edition DVDs, which themselves were heavily based off of the original extras package that started in the Laserdisc era and then was fully released on the Special Edition DVD line. All of that material will be ported over and placed on the UHD discs themselves. Whether they will be properly transferred, since most of it is older standard definition content, is something that remains to be seen, as legacy extras typically are just thrown on discs and very often are not given proper attention in terms of making sure they're transferred properly and the frame rate's okay and the encoding's okay and they at least upscale well enough. They certainly don't seem to be going in and rebuilding a lot of the vintage documentaries, which was something that was partially attempted for the Blu-ray releases for at least the film main documentaries. John Cork and others who were originally involved in making those got to update some of those in HD, but were never allowed to actually finish doing those. So I don't think anything like that has happened for these. It seems like they are literally just porting over everything as is. So essentially everything from the extras you have on the Blu-ray releases for the Connery films is basically making the jump here and will probably be exactly the same in terms of quality and appearance. This also means there's no new supplements, which is not only expected, but sadly common for most major studio releases. And one would think that the Bond films finally reaching UHD would get at least something, but that's not happening here. So essentially, we're just getting all of the legacy extras ported over and on the UHD discs themselves, which is something that can cause space and encoding issues since there's a substantial amount of supplements. So with this also being the Warner Studio label, who's notorious for having disc encoding issues and space issues, it doesn't bode well. And while they did a good job with the disc encoding of the Terminator when they handled that, that only had a few legacy extras. Each of these films have tons of legacy extras. So I kind of wish that there were Blu-rays with the extras to save space for the features on UHD. So unfortunately, I think we will have to look at the encoding of these UHDs and worry about space, since the UHDs themselves will be also filled with hours upon hours of legacy supplements. And this brings to light the fact that these sets will not include Blu-ray discs of the new masters or Blu-ray discs of any kind. These are UHD only, which means either set will merely have the 6 UHDs with the 4K masters of the films with Dolby Vision and all of the legacy supplements in standard definition in HD. So this means if you do not have UHD capability or you don't have a player, you're pretty much flat out of luck, because nothing has been announced for a Blu-ray release of the new masters of the Connery films. So this is a UHD exclusive set. It does include a digital copy, which you will be able to redeem in either set, but it's just UHD and digital copy. There are no included Blu-rays, and not even a bundled in extra copy of the pre-existing Blu-rays with all the supplements, which I thought they might do. That's something that typically happens on Warner releases. They might include the old Blu-ray with all the old supplements, so they don't have to put the supplements on the new UHD. And they've got a Blu-ray in there for people who don't have UHD capability, even though it's the old Blu-ray with the old master. At least there's something essentially for everybody picking this up, but that didn't happen here. So that's all we know for the time being. We will have to wait until there's perhaps any further information or some advanced reviews come out with a little bit more info for us to sort of pick through. The release date is June 10th, and we now have the artwork, the contents, and the overall tech specs for the standard box set at $100 US, and then the limited steelbook with the rather uninspired looking steelbooks at $140 US. And the only difference between the two is, of course, the limited steelbook packaging and outer case, and the little slip of paper saying you paid more for steelbooks. So it's not really what all of us Bond fans were hoping for, and not what we would get from a boutique label handling the films, but it's also pretty much in keeping with what we see from studio labels. So it's, not really a surprise. But I have to say, the artwork for the steelbooks is uninspired and rather frankly dull. But the artwork for the standard box set is baffling and unacceptable. It is just, I don't even have the right words for it. It's at once infuriating and also baffling and perplexing, and it's an example of looking at a cover art markup and kind of just going, who is this for? It's not going to make Bond fans happy. It's not going to be super appealing to consumers who have never seen a Bond film before. It doesn't really work for anyone outside of, yes, it's got some vintage Japanese poster images, but just in little slivers all over. So, yeah, this is, I think, a new level of bad for a Bond film collection in terms of artwork. At least it's not as bad as the final Blu-ray covers with the matching white borders that used production stills and random images with some really terrible effects added. But it's just so random that I think it is one of the worst Bond video covers, just due to the sheer randomness and lack of effort put in. That's quite obvious. But at least we know the release date for the UHDs, the list price, that they will contain all of the legacy supplements, that these transfers will have Dolby Vision HDR, and that at least for 5 of the 6 films, we will have some form of the original audio tracks, again with Thunderball being the only one where we won't really know what the mono track is until we actually get to watch the film and examine it, because it could very likely be another fold down of a stereo remix. So I just wanted to put something together in regards to finally having some technical information and news about the upcoming release of the 6 Sean Connery Eon James Bond films on UHD, which is finally happening and hopefully is a sign that the rest of the original 20 film series will finally get its long overdue release on UHD, and thus we could finally get away from the problematic transfers of the Blu-ray releases. I don't expect these to be perfect, but they should at least visually be better than the Blu-rays, as what we've already been able to see in terms of the streaming versions in 4K SDR, all being visual improvements. So, as always, I hope my babblings about the world of James Bond and physical media has been at least somewhat fun and informative, and I definitely encourage any Bond fan to pick these up once the June 10th release date has happened, as I don't know how long this partnership and release will actually last and stay in print now that Amazon is involved and typically is not one for physical media releases. So, I think this is some stuff that may have been worked out before the Amazon buyout or been in the works, and we just have to hope that the rest of the films will see a similar rollout and will likely be also in further actor collections. So as always, please do keep supporting both studio labels and boutique labels by buying films on disc in order to help keep both physical media and film culture alive. Keep bonding, and as always, thank you ever so much for watching.